Hello friends, this is Kazi and you're here with MediTC. So today I'll be talking to you about the peritoneum. I'll be talking specifically about the greater and lesser sac, about their orientation, about how they are connected to each other, as well as if this diagram has been something very difficult for you to decode, I hope I'll be making that easier for you. So let's begin. Before moving any further, I'd be talking about what, where, and why does the peritoneum exist and how is it formed. So what is the peritoneum? To make it simple, I'd say that it's something which lines your abdominal cavity, the abdominal wall from within, and it's also something which covers most of the abdominal viscera. So just suppose this is your abdominal cavity, the wall and the cavity within, and this is your abdominal viscera, some organ inside your abdominal cavity. So the peritoneum will be lining it from within, a protective lining from within, and it will also be covering your viscera from outside. So both of these together is the function of your peritoneum. Now, where does it lie? Of course, if it's in the abdominal cavity, it's somewhere lying beneath the dome of the diaphragm and above your pelvic organs, because the diaphragm is something separating your thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. So just between the two is your peritoneal sac. Why does it exist? So that's quite simple for you to understand. So because you know that your abdominal cavity is a house to a lot many viscera. So a lot many organs are sitting inside your abdominal cavity and they need support. Now the peritoneum is something which is giving you not only the support, but it's also giving you an optimal support. Just imagine the support was in the form of some ligaments or something which is like suspending it from the dome of the diaphragm above. Now what could happen with this support? Of course this is not an optimal support, because after some movements, you can imagine what happened with these things. They would have been something like that. The strings would have got entangled, and that's what you don't want. The next job of your peritoneum is also to convey the abdominal organs with their supply. That's the nerve supply, the arterial supply, and the venous supply. So even again, if there was no route for these things to travel through, they would again get tangled here with each other, and that would not be optimal. So the peritoneum, besides providing support to your abdominal viscera, they also convey these arterial and venous and nerve supply to the organs. How so? This is what we'll be checking next. So how is your peritoneum exactly formed? If you want to create your own peritoneal model, I would want you to take your fist and get yourself a balloon. Yes, this is exactly what I want you to do. So now try invaginating your fist into this balloon. Now this is exactly what your visceral organs are doing with the peritoneal sac. So imagine that this balloon right here is your peritoneal sac, and that's filled with some fluid. Now this fluid is your peritoneal fluid, and the fist here is your viscera. And when you are invaginating your viscera inside this peritoneal sac, do you think that the fist is inside the balloon or inside the fluid? No, of course not. It's simply covered by the balloon. So the layer of the balloon or the peritoneal sac, which is directly in approximation with the fist, is nothing but your inner visceral layer of the peritoneal sac. And the layer which is on the opposite side, which is not in direct contact with your viscera, is the outer parietal layer. So whom or with what is the outer parietal layer in contact with? So this is quite easy for you to understand now, that the peritoneal sac, I told you, was sitting in the abdominal cavity. So this is your abdominal wall in here, and this outer layer is in contact with the abdominal wall. So of course this outer layer is in contact with the abdominal wall, and so the peritoneum on one side is lining the abdominal wall from within and also lining your viscera from above. Now there is a part of this peritoneum you can see which is overlapping with each other. If you want to understand this much better, look at this diagram. So after covering your viscera, the peritoneum has now folded upon itself. So this part of the peritoneum which has folded upon itself is called a ligament. It has different other terms which we'll be learning later, but for now, just remember this is also called as ligament. Now, you must be like, okay, everything is fine. So we have a balloon and it has been invaginated by multiple organs, but in this diagram, can you just tell me where the balloon is and who is invaginating what and from where? Well, all these questions will be answered once we have a look at the embryology of development of the GI tract. So that's what we'll be doing next. So, as I told you, this is what you're seeing, the peritoneal sac from above. It has been cut from above and below. So this is why you're seeing the upper and the lower part is open. And this is your developing gut tube. So, the first thing you need to note in here that the gut tube invaginates the peritoneal sac from the posterior abdominal wall. So this is the rule, that it is invaginating it from the posterior side, the first thing. The second thing is that the branches from the abdominal aorta which are supplying the gut tube also start invaginating the peritoneal balloon, and while doing so you can see they create a tract for themselves. So these are the two layers in between whom they are traveling through, and see, the problem is solved. Now they won't get tangled, and this is how the peritoneum makes route for these vessels and nerves to travel through. Alright, so that's done. One more thing you need to notice in here, that while folding upon itself, the peritoneal layers create this ligament I told you before, and this ligament is supporting the gut tube from the posterior abdominal wall. Also, I have noted down some terminologies here on the right side, and I want you to understand them. Now, this ligament in here, if is supporting the stomach in here, then that ligament will be called an omentum. If the same thing, this ligament, is supporting the large intestine or the colon from the posterior abdominal wall, you will be calling it a mesocolon. Alright? And if this gut tube here was a small intestine, then the ligament will be called a mesentery. And if this is anything besides your stomach or small or large intestine, then any other organ like liver, spleen, etc., you will be calling it a ligament. Alright? So, fine. So let's move ahead. Now, so till now I've told you that the gut tube invaginates the abdominal sac from the posterior side, and so it has a single posterior attachment. But there is one exception you need to note here about the foregut. So can you see here, the foregut has a posterior attachment as well as an anterior attachment. Now why do you think so this is needed? Because you can see the rest of the gut tube, which is the midgut and the hindgut, has nothing or no other viscera growing in front of them, so there's nothing more to support. But here in front of the stomach you have this big important organ, that's the liver, growing in, and if it had only one attachment from the posterior abdominal wall, definitely this entire thing would have sagged down because it needs support, and that's the entire purpose of your peritoneum. So this is why the foregut has an anterior attachment as well, so it is also somewhat supported from the anterior wall. Now once you've noted this exception, let's move forward again. So here, the stomach and the omentum. If you remember, what I told you about the omentum is the fold of peritoneum suspending the stomach, specifically the stomach. So this is the omentum. So you have two parts of the omentum. One which is dorsal to the stomach, this is a lateral view, you're seeing it, and this is the anterior abdominal wall and the posterior abdominal wall. So the one thing which is attaching it from the anterior abdominal wall is called the ventral mesogastrium, and the one thing which is attaching it with the posterior abdominal wall is called the dorsal mesogastrium. Quite easy to understand. Now what happens next? Remember, the ventral and dorsal mesogastrium are going to house some more other organs, so there will be support to them as well. So good news that the stomach has two more neighbors. Fine. So now just look at this thing here. Again, you're seeing the ventral mesogastrium is helping the liver to grow within it, and the dorsal mesogastrium is helping the spleen to grow within it. And one thing above here is the dome of the diaphragm, and the rest of the gut tube, which is the midgut and the hindgut, has only the posterior attachment, as I told you before, and they're also conveying the blood vessels through them, so they won't get tangled now. Now I have added in here some arrows, the double-headed arrows. You can see the arrow which is here above. This thing is completely attached to the diaphragm. Just remember that. So it's not free. It's completely attached to the diaphragm. But down here, you can see the ventral mesogastrium is incomplete, because the purpose of this is met already, because it wanted to support the liver, and now the purpose is met already. It doesn't continue all the way down till the hindgut, and so now the purpose is met already. It doesn't continue all the way down till the hindgut, and so we don't have a ventral attachment down there. So of course there is no attachment with the ventral mesogastrium or of the ventral mesogastrium with anything else. So this end is free. So remember, this is the superior end which is attached with the diaphragm, the inferior end which is free. I want you to remember this because I'll be talking about this again after a few slides. Now I am standing over here and I want to look at this from above. What do you think it will be looking like? Just check it. So this is what you'll be seeing next. You're seeing it from above. So you have these organs all in one line. The stomach in the center, the spleen behind it. Now why am I calling it behind? Just look at this vertebra here. It will guide you. So this is the posterior wall. So that's why the spleen is behind it and the liver is anterior. So this part is called the falciform ligament, the anterior part of the ventral mesogastrium. Yes, because it's ahead of the stomach. So this part is this falciform ligament. This part later is going to form the laceromentum, the part which is attaching the stomach with the liver. So a part of the ventral mesogastrium called the laceromentum. Now behind here, these are the derivatives of the dorsal mesogastrium. The part attaching it with the spleen is called the gastrosplenic ligament, as the name suggests, and the part which is attaching the spleen with the posterior abdominal wall behind is called the splenorenal ligament, because you can see the kidney is growing in here. So it's the splenorenal ligament. Alright. Also, I want you to notice the two arrows which I've shown you here. So as I told you, because the foregut is attached on two sides, both the anterior and the posterior side, this peritoneal balloon which was entirely single, the cavity which was entirely single, has now been divided into two parts. One part which is to its right and the other part which is to its left. So for your convenience, I want you to notice it and remember, is it a right and a left sac? So this one is the right sac and this one is the left sac. Now there is no such name in embryology or no such terminology in embryology already, but this is something I have added up to make you understand, because I want you to remember these two sacs as well for now. So the right and left cavities. Okay, now let's see what happens next. Now look at this diagram in here. The stomach tube undergoes a lot of many of rotations to finally come to the adult position in your body. So this tube doesn't stay as it is. First of all, it rotates along a longitudinal rotation axis about 90 degrees in a clockwise direction. So clockwise direction for the stomach standing over there will be on this side. So see how when the stomach rotated, along with them, the two ligaments I told you, the gastrosplenic ligament and the hepatogastric ligament, which is nothing but your laceromentum, also rotated. And when it rotated, it carried the spleen as well to the left side and the liver to the right side somewhat. But remember, the anterior attachment is going to stay the same because it is attached to the abdominal wall. That's not going to change. But still, the liver got pushed somewhat to the right side, and also the liver is growing, so it is going to be occupying much of this cavity, the right side, the right cavity I told you. So it's going to be occupying the much of the right cavity, and it's also going to get pushed to the right side because of this rotation. Now this rotation is not yet complete. So when this rotation is complete, you can see how the liver is almost inside this right cavity, has grown so much and has been pushed to the right so much because of this rotation, and the spleen has come towards the left side. Also, when the stomach was rotating 90 degrees, you can just think of it, the anterior wall must have come to the right side and the posterior wall must have come to the left side. Pause the video and think of it again. Okay, so the anterior wall has come to the right side, the posterior wall has come to the left side, and the left wall is growing very much faster than the right wall. So this is the left wall. The left wall is growing very much faster. So if it's growing much faster, it forms a greater curvature. And the right wall, which is not growing as much and is not keeping up with the competition, is now smaller, and that's called the lesser curvature. Now, the right wall, as I told you, is in relation with the lever here, and the lesser curvature, the ligament which will be connecting the lesser curvature with the lever, will be called the lesser omentum. This is the thing. The hepatogastric ligament itself is connecting the right wall with the lever. This itself is the lesser omentum, and the greater curvature will be going from here. Whatever the connection will be here, it will be the greater omentum. If you have understood this, let's move ahead. Now what happens next? The stomach is not yet done with its rotation, and so it is again going to rotate along its anterior-posterior axis. Anterior-posterior axis means something like a pin inserted inside the stomach. So it's going to rotate such that this dome here is going to move somewhat downwards, and the pylorus here is going to move somewhat upwards and to the right side. So when it does that, it also pushes the ligaments which were attached in here. So the ligament which was attached in here is also going to get pushed, and the ligament which is attached in here with the lever is also going to get pushed or pulled because of this rotation. But the spleen, remember, and the lever, remember, is not going to move down. They will remain in their same places. So only the ligaments are going to get pushed downwards, but not the organ along with them, and so there will be this fold generated. Are you able to see this fold here? Yes, that is generated because of the downwards pulling of the ligament because of this sort of a rotation of the stomach. Okay, so I think this will be much clearer if I show you an animation, but I hope you are trying to understand what I'm trying to say. Okay, so this is what happened during the rotation procedure I showed you. This one is the lesser omentum. This one is going to form the greater omentum later, which is attaching to its greater curvature. And this is the spleen growing in here, as you can see. Now what I want you to notice is, see, the greater omentum got folded upon itself because of that rotation and created a space within it. The same thing you'll be seeing it from the lateral side. So this is the posterior abdominal wall, and so this is the dorsal mesogastrium. So now what happened because of this entire rotation is that thing or the ligament which is attaching to the greater curvature of the stomach formed the greater omentum, and because of the rotation it got it folded upon itself to form this entire apron like thing, and that's called the greater omentum. Now is the time to introduce you to the greater and the lesser sac. So if you remember, I had told you in the beginning that the part which was to the right of the stomach and the entire ligamental attachments was called the right space, which I told you it's not actually called the right space. That the right space now has become the posterior space because it's entirely lying posterior to the stomach and all these ligaments. This entire thing which I've highlighted. So this itself is going to form the lesser sac. Okay, this is going to form the lesser sac. Also, this is extending into the two folds of the apron. If you remember that the apron which is formed because of the rotation of the stomach of the greater omentum, this is the lesser sac as well, extending into here and also lying posterior to the stomach. And the rest of the area which I'm marking here with green is anterior to the stomach, and actually on the left side of this attachments, ligamental attachments, the left side, because when this was not rotated it was to the left, and this thing is continuous with the area ahead of the mid and hind gut as well, and that entirely is going to form the greater sac. If it's not yet clear, or if it's not yet something you have imagined right properly, we can have a next thing to see. Now this is the lateral view again. So see all that rotation, because the stomach had rotated to the right side, because of which the liver got pushed to the right, and also it rotated downwards in the anterior-posterior axis, and so now the liver is somewhat above and to the right of the stomach, you can see, and the rest of the part goes to the left side. That is, the spleen goes to the left side, but it's not seen here because it has been cut in the longitudinal section. So now the part which is attaching the stomach's lesser curvature to the liver is the lesser omentum in here, and the part which is going downwards and folding upon itself is the greater omentum, and the area which you are able to see here behind the stomach and also in the two folds of the greater omentum is entirely the lesser sac, and the rest of this area is the greater sac. I hope it's now clear, and I told you it's continuous with the area ahead of the mid and the hind gut, so see how it's a greater sac. It's because it's very large, it's a greater sac, and that's why it should not confuse you now that if these two folds were called the greater omentum, why the area between them is called the lesser sac. It's because of the size of the sac, and this entire part is very large, and that's why it's called the greater sac. Now if you are thinking like why this transverse colon is inside the greater omentum, now if you remember what the adult position of the transverse colon is just beneath the stomach. So while all the rest of the rotations and development of the gut tube, which I'm not showing right now because I'm focusing on the greater and lesser sac, so when the rest of the gut tube develops and the colon is somewhere down here, its mesentery fuses with the greater omentum here. So these two things fuse, and this is what is formed. Together the fused thing is now the transverse mesocolon. If you remember, because it's suspending the colon, it's called the mesocolon. So this is the transverse mesocolon, and that's why the transverse colon is now within the greater omentum. Again we are coming towards the double-headed arrow back. So the blue double-headed arrow in that diagram or that slide which I had shown you, first the superior connection with the dome of the diaphragm. Now because of all that rotation, it has come to lie on the left side, and the lesser omentum, which was free and not attached to any side, has come to lie on the right side. So you can see this is on the right side, and that's why, because it's not attached anywhere, the area behind this lesser omentum and the stomach, which was called the lesser sac, is now continuous with the area ahead of the stomach and called the greater sac, and this is the opening of the greater sac into the lesser sac. This opening because the lesser omentum is not attached anywhere, the right free margin. So now just imagine you are sitting inside the lesser sac in there behind this lesser omentum. This is which is seen transparent, so you're able to see what is there behind. You are sitting inside there and the arrow is coming towards you. So what would you see then? So the arrow is coming towards you and you are sitting inside, and that is how you will be looking at. This is the opening of that greater sac into the lesser sac. That's called the epiploic foramen. What is that called? That's called the epiploic foramen. Epiploic foramen. So what is it bounded with? So the right free margin of the lesser omentum carries these three structures. I'll show you this. So here is where it lies. These three structures are there in this right free margin. What are those three structures? That is the portal triad containing the portal vein, the bile duct, and the hepatic artery. Now beneath it is the first part of duodenum. If you can see, this is the duodenum. The first part is there beneath it. So this is what you're seeing beneath it. Behind it is the IVC, and above it is the caudate lobe of liver. So here you can see this is the caudate lobe of liver, which is above it. So that is how the boundaries of the epiploic canal is. And when you cross through it, you are into the lesser sac now. So now I have cut the stomach's greater omentum, and this part of it is cut, and you have reflected the stomach above, so you are able to see the lesser sac inside, and it has a few recesses. Recesses are nothing but extensions of the free space into different areas. So this entire space is also continuous towards the levers. That's called the hepatic recess. The part which is going inside the two folds of the apron, that's the omental recess between the two layers of the greater omentum. Actually, there are four. And this part which is extending behind the spleen, that's the splenic recess. And this is the epiploic foramen you are entering through. So yes, exactly, this is what you are seeing right now. And this is the lesser sac, and the entire area outside this and ahead of the stomach is the greater sac. I hope this is now clearer and much more simplified for you. Thank you so much.